Greetings, RSN team. I'm Carol Talbert, RSN Field Operations Support Team Manager. Welcome back to the Parts Closer to the Customer podcast series, where we examine multiple operational initiatives in progress, and we review the long-term impacts and metrics that will help us achieve success as a support organization. Today, we introduce our sixth episode, focused on the recommended best practices for a one-call process with Clockport and your inventory. And to help us dive a bit deeper in this topic, I want to welcome both Troy Smith and Michael Santamaria. Troy and Michael, hey, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Carol.
Yeah, thanks for the return podcast opportunity.
Well, as we start, I'll set the clock to ensure we are going to remain focused. And with that, let's jump right into sharing some of the best practices gathered from the field. Starting with, what are the recommended best practices when you receive the dispatch for a repair visit before you go to that customer?
Well, Carol, a common misconception is that you need to be connected to complete your documentation. And this is just completely false. Rex's Clockport was specifically designed to be worked with offline because we know our field is sometimes in the basement or in old buildings where there's no connectivity. Service activities can be completed and parts can be consumed even if you have no Wi-Fi or cellular signal. You should be syncing your PC before heading to the site without signal, and then connecting later in the evening to ensure all the work completed for the day has been successfully synced with the cloud.
Thank you, Michael. Great advice. So moving forward, what are best practices then while you're on site with that customer?
Well, you should only consume inventory that you have in your trunk stock or in the customer on-site if one exists. You should not physically consume inventory that is not currently showing in your Clockport. These include untraced parts sitting in a storage location closet or a garage that have been shrunk or inaccurately consumed on other service activities. This is commonly known as ghost inventory and is not acceptable practice. If you are ordering a part after a repair and then requesting back office to add the part as consumed on a service activity, keep in mind that it is not an acceptable process. You are not accurately documenting the part installed in the instrument. If there is an issue with a part that's not showing correctly in Clockport, please reach out to C3 and Field Inventory Support. For situations where you received and consumed parts the same day, use the link provided by Service Support Team to request same-day delivery part to be added to your service activity. So this removes the part from your inventory and allocates it to the correct service activity. This is a best practice.
Service activities should be closed before you leave the customer site, and you should be providing a service report to the customer, either digitally or physically. This requirement is clearly stated in our documentation. Travel home should be estimated, or travel between sites should be added to the next service activity. A follow-up phone call the next day is not necessary to document within your service activity and is not a suitable reason to leave that service activity open.
Lots of feedback there. Thank you for those best practices. What are some best practices then actually before you leave that customer site yet?
Well, it's having a one-call mentality. Ask yourself, do I need to use the parts I ordered on any open calls for the next few days? If no, box up the parts not used in the original boxes with the original labels and return them to Flash.
Remember, parts ordered that are not in approved trunk stock or above the approved level should be returned to Flash Chicago within 14 days of your original order. Although this is the policy, I agree. If you have no reason to keep the part and you have closed the service activity, then why not return it right away? If you don't remember the exact date you ordered the part, there is a way to look it up in Clockport in the material movement overview on the stock screen. You can filter your views to show the last 10, 30, or 90 days, or all.
Best practice for return of excess parts is to always use the original label to ensure you are referencing the correct delivery note. Flash is required to match that delivery note on all returns. If you don't have the original label and you create a new return label, always reference the original delivery note. to ensure there's no delays in processing the return at Flash.
Logging the excess return parts in Clockport prior to your parts being in FedEx possession. Returning every excess part in Clockport is mandatory. Your Clockport inventory accuracy and Tableau SAP inventory accuracy starts with the FES logging excess parts.
Hey, Troy, I have a question for you. If I open the box, what are my options for return?
Good question, Mike. If you're returning a part, but you have opened the box, broken the vendor seal, or previous to COC label has been broken, there are only two options. If the part is still functional and there is no clear sign of damage to the part after opening the box, a certificate of conformity, COC, document is required. The COC document allows us to ensure that these parts get correctly placed back into inventory at the warehouse for the next FES to order. If the label is missing when the part arrives at Flash, it will fall into an exceptions process at the warehouse and require field inventory to follow up with you, the FES, for a COC form. If the part is not functional upon the receipt or is obviously damaged, this should be returned via the DOA process and not returned as excess. You would want to receive a defective or damaged part that was returned as excess because someone else did not take the time to inspect the part or return it appropriately, would you?
Absolutely not. We all have to do our part to contribute and ensure the right parts are placed back into usable inventory.
That's some really good feedback. I appreciate that. I know we spend a lot of time and energy with Flash because that process that you just described there is not followed correctly and creates a lot of delays in inventory getting put away and just a lot of waste in our system. So thanks. I appreciate you sharing that. So the FES has left the customer. Any other best practice ideas?
One that comes to mind is you can easily schedule a pickup with FedEx to occur at your front door and or drop off a labeled ready to ship package at a Walgreens store photo area. You also have other FedEx drop locations that can be found.
Sounds great. I like that. And so tell me about the companion training you have built to support these best practices.
Well, on the Rexis page of the field operations site, you'll find some videos and additional information on everything we talked about today. It's great to have resources to go to after listening to this podcast.
And Michael, one last question. How does this one-call process align with the new field service solution?
Well, in the new field service solution, parts will be ordered against a given work order for anything outside of approved stock. When you close that work order, the user will be prompted to take action for any of the parts that were ordered. So if you chose not to consume, the system will prompt you to mark that part for return. This will allow you to return it at that moment or close your work order and have a reminder that you still have a return pending. The one call mentality is built into the processes behind the new field service solution.
Well, I like that. I mean, I appreciate the tip earlier where you talked about how you can look at material movement in Clockport. I'm sure some people weren't aware of it, but this eliminates the need to even do that in the future. It's just going to tell you. I like that. Thank you. Great insight to what's coming in the future. And Troy, how does this align with our FedEx transition?
So for the FedEx transition, the more we follow the one-call process of returning excess parts and or repairable parts removed, the better position we are in for the transfer of inventory from Flash to FedEx for the go live.
Great point. I appreciate that also. And it alleviates a lot of the backlog that Flash sees. We see a lot of focus on inventory and then a lot of those returns that come into Flash, which creates a backlog. And the more you do that one call mentality in the process with regular occurrence, then the less we're going to see of those spikes of Flash in the backlog, and the less we'll see in the future with FedEx of those spikes as well. So guys, I really, truly appreciate your time today and sharing some of these best practices and the one-call process mentality. As we wrap up this episode, what I want to challenge anyone listening, if you have additional ideas on best practices that we've not covered in this podcast session, please share those with us. We provided a feedback form on the same Google site mentioned earlier that you can use. And I do have to wonder, is there anybody listening out there? If so, please give me your feedback on the entire podcast series, what you'd like to hear additional information on, or something we've not covered. Please definitely give us your feedback. We appreciate that. Troy and Michael, again, thank you both for taking the time today. This certainly helps us to better understand the one-call process best practices from the field. And it helps us understand not only the benefits for the field, but ultimately the benefits for our customers. As I stated previously, our goal in this podcast series is to provide you with these digestible updates on our Parts Closer to the Customer initiative. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will provide an update on the overall FedEx transition. Until then, remember, right parts, right place at the right time.